Hi there. I wanted to record this special video for you today to talk a little bit about how it is that we take notes for class and for the course in general. It's remarkably challenging to keep everything in your mind, to make sure that you digest all the material, to kind of combine notes from textbook with notes from articles, with notes from lectures, whether it's audio lectures or video lectures. So I wanted to create this video for you all to give you some tips and tricks on how you can best take notes for my class, but also for pretty much every class. So the thing to remember is that there are lots of ways to take notes. There is no one perfect way to take notes. I'm going to show you a couple of examples and make some general suggestions for you and focus in on one notes-taking style in particular, but it's important to remember that there are lots of ways to do this and there's no one perfect way. So you need to figure out what works for you and go with that, okay? Here are 4 examples to give you a sense of the different ways that you could take notes. So what you can see here is 4 different pictures, different images with note-taking styles. The one on the top left of the screen, this is a very visual style of note-taking. You can see that the person has drawn diagrams, they've done fun, cool lettering, they've got pictures and things like that. And so this is, if you're a visual learner, this is probably a really good idea for you. It kind of combines almost doodling with note-taking all in one. So that could be the best method for you. Similarly, top right-hand corner, what you can see here is you can see that this person has also combined diagrams with lots of arrows and pop-out bubbles and things like that. So if you're somebody, again, who learns visually, this might be a good option for you. Part of the thing about becoming really good at being a student is knowing what style is your style and knowing how you learn best and knowing what you need and working with that. So there's some self-discovery involved here. And there's no one perfect way to do this. So you got to sort of look at the different options and continue with what works best for you. The 2 very common styles of note-taking that tend to go on, especially in the university context, are this one here, this outline method. This is the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And what you can see here is, the subject, let's say it's politics. Main idea, what is politics? Subpoint, politics is X, Y, and Z. These are all subpoints, right? And then under each of these subpoints, you record some information. And then you move on to your next main idea, which is, let's say, what is power? And then you talk a little bit about those subpoints. And then you might move on to what is government, and so on and so forth. So that's an outline method where you end up with this long list of items with bullets, with some stuff that you have gotten from either the texts that you've had to read for class or from the online lectures, be they audio or video or whatever. The bottom right-hand corner of the screen here, you'll see this title with Cornell Notes. This is a very popular note-taking method that a lot of folks, myself included, tend to use because it allows you to kind of go back and reflect and go back and add in more notes. And that act of going back and doing more is really, really useful for learning. So I'm going to focus my attention for the rest of this tiny little lecture on the Cornell note-taking method to show you kind of how it works, what to do, and to encourage you to think about building in a note-taking style and plan into your daily education activities. So the Cornell method for taking notes, the way this works is you have a sheet of paper, and you can do this digitally. Like, so if some people are fancy and have iPads and can do this using, templates and things like that, you can do this using a computer. If you are using, let's say, a Word document, you can do it so that you have 1/3 of your page and then the 2/3 with a larger, wider column. Not everybody likes to take notes using their laptop, but others really, really do, and others find it really useful, and for a variety of reasons that might be your best option. So I leave that to you. I'm going to describe this in terms of written notes using a pen and paper or a pencil and paper or a tablet if that's what you've got, because it's a visual style and it's broken up, the page is broken up in a particular kind of way, but you can emulate this using a Word document if you so desire. So what you can see here is that the page is divided up into 3 sections, right? You've got the big section on the top right. That's the notes section where you take notes in the moment, like you're listening to a lecture, you take notes there. And then you can see that you've broken up the page into 2 additional sections. One, there's a margin on the left-hand side of the page. It's about, let's say, 1/4 to 1/3 of the page. And on the bottom, there's about a 2-inch gap at the bottom where you write your summary. So what you would be doing, first thing you do is you take your notebook and you divide up the page into these sections. And if you're using a tablet, you can create a template with this. Some of them already have. Some programs already have templates for Cornell Notes, but some of them don't, so you can create that yourself. If you're using a notebook, go ahead and do it on pen and paper. And if you're using a word processing document, on your computer, you can do something else like this as well. So create a template for yourself, and then you can actually begin to take notes. So in the big bulk of the page there, you're going to take notes during class or during your reading of your textbook with main points and bullet points and diagrams and whatever else you're doing in that area. That's your kind of main note-taking area. And then what you've got here is on the left-hand side here, you've got some cues, some additional things to think about when thinking about the notes that you took. So you can include there, notes to be written soon after class. You can write in there some anticipated exam questions. You can write down main ideas if there's vocabulary words. It's like the really important stuff, and you pop it out. And so you add extra notes to your notes. And then at the bottom of the page, what you do is after class is over, or after you've listened to the recorded lecture or watched the video or whatever it might be, or read the textbook chapter, you go in there and you write a summary for each page of your note taking. Okay, so you write this after you're done all of the stuff for that particular unit, for example, and then go back in there and reread your notes. And then in the bottom section, you write a little summary about what were the main points on this page. Okay, so this way you can find information down the road, but that active summary is also deeply, deeply useful for you in terms of your memory and recollection. So you can see an example here of a Cornell Notes style note-taking exercise. This was done for an English class. Okay, so we're not doing English classes ourselves. We're a political science class, but the rules apply, and they're helpful even to be translated into political science notes. So the topic of the day was parts of speech. What you can see on this page here is that the instructor covered 2 parts of speech. There were 8 parts, and there are 2 parts covered. One is nouns, one is pronouns. So in the notes section, as the instructor is talking, you take notes, you write down, okay, nouns. Here's a noun, there's a definition, and then some examples of common nouns, examples of what this means, examples of proper nouns, so names capitalized like Alice Walker, Amanda Bittner, Chicago, Newfoundland and Labrador, whatever. Singular nouns, so you have one person, one friend, one truth, one box, one thing, one fox. Plural nouns, so more than one, so you mostly use add an S, right? Friends, truths, boxes, right? So that's the plural version of the singular noun. Down below, you've got pronouns. So again, here's what it is, the definition, the word that takes the place of a noun. So the phone rang and Bill answered it, right? So it is the pronoun, phone is the noun, right? And you get a sense of what this is. Now, we talk about pronouns a lot, yes, in politics, but just in life. And so knowing what a pronoun actually is probably pretty useful for us all, right? So what you've got here then in the main bulk of the page is an explanation, or the notes that you would have taken in class or while listening to a lecture or while watching a lecture. And then here what you have in the margin is some questions. So remember what we had here was, anticipated exam questions. What is a noun? Anticipated exam question, what is a pronoun? And here's the definition. So one of the things we often do in politics is we often, political science, ask you to define key terms, right? So for example, what is politics? What is government? What is an election, or whatever? And hopefully these things would have been taught to you in class, right? And so thinking about what kinds of questions you might get asked on an exam can really help you to review the materials, right? So thinking about it from the question asker's point of view, as opposed to just the notes point of view. And then what you can see here at the bottom of the page is a summary, right? So a noun is a word that names a person, place, object, or idea. Yet da, pronoun, and so on. So this would allow you to, when you're studying, to go back and say, oh yeah, this was the page that we talked about nouns on. This is the page that we talked about pronouns on. And so you can actually go back and add to this. The beautiful thing too about this note-taking style, as you can see, there's lots of white space on this page still, which means you can go back, you can add additional stuff, you can take your colorful pen, like my purple one here, go back in, make some more notes, make some more things, make some more observations about, what you might have learned, when you might have learned it, things that might have cropped up, and so on. So all that white space allows you to go back and add an additional material, additional notes where you might want to. Okay, so as you're reviewing for an exam or reviewing, for a paper that you're writing, you can go back and you can add additional notes in there. So a few things to remember in terms of note-taking general rules. The important thing here is that you're synthesizing the material, whether it's textbook material or journal article material or newspaper article material or lecture material, and you're synthesizing it into your own mind, into your own words, into your own thinking. The goal is not to copy down every single thing that your instructor says, right? So you don't want to copy down word for word all the things on their slides. You don't want to copy down word for word everything that they say. You really want to use your own words, and you want to take little snippets out of what you just watched or listened to or read. You don't need complete sentences. These are notes, right? So you can use point forms and bullets, use a little, a little line and then write your notes. You can use numbers like I've got here on the side here. You don't need to have full sentences. The important thing to think about too as you're writing notes is you really want to think about what's important as you take down notes. So don't just write down every single word, write down the important words, right? The important observations, the important things, the implications, the definitions, all that kind of stuff. And importantly, you don't just want to write everything word for word and then move on. You want to reflect. You want to think about what was just said, right? So let's say you're listening to one of my lectures, okay? And you listen to the whole lecture, and then you're like, you don't just move on. At that point, you stop and you think, okay, what have they just said? Do I understand that? Does that make sense in the context of the readings that were assigned for this particular class? And if you're confused, ask for clarification. Of course, it's really challenging right now in this world of COVID to ask for clarification when you don't have the opportunity to see somebody face to face and meet with them, twice a week or 3 times a week in a classroom, right? But you do have the opportunity to ask for clarification either via email or online in D2L using one of the areas where we can ask questions. Or if there's an online, like sort of Zoom style component to the class, you can also go on there and ask questions verbally at that point. So thinking about what was just said and how that relates to what you've read is a really good idea. And if you're confused, I would even recommend going back. So let's say the lecture says something and you're like, well, I read this article I was supposed to read, but I don't really understand how that fits with what the lecturer just said. You can actually go back and reread parts of the textbook or parts of the journal article, and then compare that again to what the lecturer just said, right? So if the instructor has said something that doesn't make sense to you, go back and reflect on what you read in the first place and see if you can figure out a little bit more what it is that they're trying to say to you and what they're trying to teach you. Because the more times you evaluate this stuff and the more times you reflect upon this material and the more times you review this material, the better it's going to sink into your brain and you're going to retain it. So I want you to think about this little checklist that I've got up here. I'm not going to read through each of these points, but I think it's really important for you to think about some of these things as you're, reflecting upon your own note taking, right? Because we all take notes, and I think a lot of us take notes without actively thinking about what we're doing. So first of all, when you're taking notes, did you review the assignments, like what you're required to do? And did you think about that actively? Like, did you just read it passively and move on? Or did you actually look at the stuff and say, what does that mean? What do I think about that? So it's that what do I think about that part that is more and more important, and it becomes more important with each passing year of your university degree. If you encountered unfamiliar terms and concepts, did you look them up? Did you stop and think about them for a second? Did you see if there are things that you're not quite sure about? And then again, did you actually make a list of questions or points where you want clarification? Because sometimes you can list yourself, points of clarification, things that you're not sure about, and then you can go back and reread the textbook like I suggest, or if that still doesn't work, you can then go and ask the instructor. But having a list of things that you're not quite sure about allows you to then talk to other students about these questions, issues you're having, concepts you're not quite sure about, and so on. It's super valuable to have those kinds of conversations. If there were parts of the text that were particularly complex or that you really had a hard time with, make note of them and say, what was it about these things that I didn't quite understand? And write this down as well. Like, the more we write so reading is writing, and in a lot of ways writing is reading. So you want to think about the more you engage with this material, the better you're going to understand it, and the more you're going to remember it when the time comes. Did you put notes in the appropriate notebook or the appropriate section of your binder or whatever it is that you're doing? Are things organized in a way that makes sense? Are they arranged according to the kinds of notes, textbook notes versus article notes versus classroom lecture notes and things like that? Think up an organization scheme and try to stick with it. Did you put notes into your own words? Again, there is no sense in just writing everything out word for word from the textbook or from an online lecture or from anything else. It's really important that you digest it and that you put things into your own words. That will help with retention and that will help with comprehension. Did you keep your notes brief? Usually, if notes are extremely detailed and extremely long, it's because you were putting things down word for word. So try to keep them brief. Use a coding scheme that you develop, whatever it is. There's no right way to do studying. There's no right way to take notes. There's plenty of wrong ways, but usually the wrong ways involve not enough engagement with the material, not enough concentration, not enough review, not enough brevity. Um, Again, did you check your texts and references to clarify something? So if a lecture doesn't make sense, I mean, there's some chance it's because the instructor is not making a lot of sense, but there's also a really good chance that it's because you didn't understand the textbook. So why don't you go back and take another look? Um, are you, when you're listening to a lecture, are you listening for word clues and other ways to note important concepts and issues that you've got to take note of? It's easier in a textbook because a lot of the time key concepts are usually written in bold, but not always, right? So how else can you find important concepts and how else can you take note of them and highlight them for yourself so that you make sure that you know what they are? Um, did you review your lecture notes? So that summary page or the summary section at the bottom of the Cornell Notes page is perfect because it forces you to go back and review your lecture notes. So go back and reread your notes a day after that you actually write them, and then write those summaries after that. And then, a day later again, go back and review. Does your summary make sense given what you recollect at this point? Are there more notes you now want to add in? Did you go and re-watch or re-listen to the lecture another time? And if so, what did you note that was different? Add that in as well. Use another color if you like. Do you see any mistakes in your notes? Are there things that you wrote down before that now that you know more make less sense and so you want to revise them? So the more, again, like I said, the more you engage with this material, the more you go back and revisit it, the more you review it, the more you compare textbook concepts to lecture concepts to journal article concepts and compare those to your own understanding of what's going on, the more you write and read and engage with this stuff, the better you're going to remember it and the more it's going to stick in your head. It seems like a lot of work, right? Note taking actually is a lot of work as you go back, you read your highlighted parts of the textbook and you write notes about it and things like that. But I want you to keep your eye on the prize, right? The more you do now while taking notes and thinking about readings or class lectures or whatever else, the better that you're going to actually retain that information. And by extension, the better you're going to do on the exam. Okay, so put the work in now because it will make your job easier later on. And I say do better on the exam, but exams aren't the only thing that we're trying to achieve here, right? Yes, you want to do well, and yes, you want to get a good grade. But, I mean, for the most part, the stuff that we're learning in class and in the textbook is really quite useful and can go with you for a long period of time, even after the course is long over. So you're going to retain things better and remember it all the more you engage with it on an ongoing basis. So that's it. Good luck to you. If you've got questions, I'm happy to chat more about note taking. How it is that we actually do the work of being a student is one of my favorite topics, and I'm super happy to talk more with you about it. Okay?